xenophobia is apparent in all other peoples. If you look at some of the peoples that is the most strongest in, it'll be what we call the Semitic peoples. Arabs, Jews, people known as Druze, um, different sects in Iran, Persia, which was once known as Persia. These are the Yazidis. These are the people who exhibit the most extreme manifestations of xenophobia. Um, Asians, when I say Asians, I mean East Asians to a lesser extent exhibit xenophobia, but they have a natural mistrust of foreigners, but in a different way. But they also have enough xenophobia to keep others from totally coming in and taking over their culture, their way of life. And if it is taken over, which it has been in the past, it's normally done so by others who are very similar to them. For instance, the Mongol conquest of China and Korea and other places 1,000 years ago by Genghis Khan and his descendants, which on its own is not as devastating as if you're taken over by people who are totally different than you, who look different than you, speak a totally different language, totally different culture than you, because it tends to destroy who you are. But if it's a people who are very similar to you, then it's much more easier for both peoples to amalgamate and form a cohesion. Uh, the Europeans, the Europeans, while not as xenophobic as the Semitic peoples, they have a very strong xenophobic urge to them. In recent years, the past 50 to 100 years, they've overcome some of it. They've overcome enough of it to actually befriend and charm other peoples of the world, but they still have that core basic xenophobic nature that helps them to dominate the world and helps them to keep others from dominating them. Now, the reason I think that Africans didn't develop xenophobia is because, according to science, we are perhaps the root race for the other sub-races. Sub-race being Mongoloid, Asian, Caucasoid, European. And if you read, some other anthropologists will add Australoid, which is like Aborigines and maybe peoples from the Indian subcontinent, what was once known as the subcontinent of India. And there's another, and the Bantoid or what have you, which is the little pygmy types or little Ba and Twaka types you find in Africa, and the Bushmen. They categorize these as different races of men. But sticking with the modern classifications, the African race is the root race for Europeans and Mongoloids. So therefore, if the African race is the root race, then that means that to most black people, then Asians and Europeans are not really foreign to them. It's more like they see them as a family, whereas Asians and Europeans do not see Africans that way. Genetically, there's more genetic mutation or more genetic difference within the African race than there is in the Asian or the European race. Europeans, and Asians are closer to one another than they are to Africans genetically. That's a fact. If you look at the African and you look at the European, you're looking at two very opposing. I mean, they're on opposite ends of the pole of what it is to be a human. The African is dark, very closely curled hair, the thick nose, a broad nose, thick lips. His lower arm is long relative to his upper arm. Forearms long relative to his tricep muscles. His lower leg is long relative to his thigh. European is almost the exact opposite. As a matter of fact, he is the exact opposite. His nose is keen. His lips are, in some cases, almost non-existent. The European can be actually, his skin is a shade of brown, but it's the lightest, palest shade of brown, almost to become non-brown, almost to become all mankind actually is a shade of brown. But the European is to the extent where if you get any lighter, then he'll be off of that chip. He'll be off of that pole. So, I mean, his hair is straight. I said the African hair is curly. So they tend to have more xenophobia than Africans, because, like I said, for a million years or more, Africans were the only people that existed. So through evolution, these other peoples came, and these other peoples who went away to Europe and Asia and changed and came back and happened to see, happened to run into these African type peoples, formed xenophobia where the African didn't form it because of his role as a prototype for the rest of mankind. And this has been what has plagued the black man for thousands, ever since Alexander and the Greeks. And actually before that, ever since actually the Syrians in the 7th century BC. And even the Egyptians, because I believe that the original Egyptians were probably a population of African types, I'll say Africoids, from the Sahara area, which at one time was a swamp and fertile land, but is now the desert. And that this type mixed in with very early on, maybe 20,000 years or more, with Asiatic and European types coming down from Eurasia, the steppes of Eurasia, down into southern Europe, and coming over into Saudi Arabia and Western Asia. And this is where you get the land of so-called Goshen, is Lower Egypt, which is northern Egypt, which connects to the Middle East and Asia, and then Lower Egypt, which is runs down the Nile into Sudan, what is Sudan today, and South, and East Africa, and what have you. So, if you read the Bible says that it tells Egyptians, "I will send you to Patros and make you a base people." This is one in Isaiah. Patros is Upper Egypt. Upper Egypt actually is the beginning of Upper Egypt, which is very close to what today is Sudan. So that's even the ancient biblical writers telling you that these Egyptians originated in the lands where black people were from. But the Egyptians they're originally black, now they're not. They're mixed, and they've been mixed for thousands of years now. So I wish my Afrocentric brothers would stop trying to claim them as black. They're mixed. But anyway, by black people mixing readily and not having enough xenophobia of these foreigners, it took Egypt away from Africa, because the foreigners they rarely mixed with were very xenophobic. And I'll have to get back with you later on because my tape is about to wait. How much more time I got? Okay. This is a subject that has to really be delved into in depth to understand what's going on. Because when it's all said and done, only a small group of us new Africans who for some reason or another are xenophobic are going to have to form together and create something new, because the whole black race is a sinking Titanic. They may think that they're doing something or going somewhere because they're getting degrees and they're integrating and all this and all that, but they're just going to lose themselves even further, just like the Egyptians did. The Egyptians didn't consider themselves part of Africa, nor did they consider themselves part of Western Asia, meaning the Semitic or Europeans. They considered themselves a people all to themselves, just like the Somalis or the Eritreans do not look on themselves as being black Africans, but they look on themselves as being their own people, which is what I believe the Egyptians essentially were more like an Eritrean or a Somalian or something of that nature. Well, I'll be back at you. Peace. Okay.